everybody, this is Sean Martin. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining CyberSecurity here on ITSPmagazine Podcast Network live, kind of sort of from the show floor here in London for InfoSecurity Europe. And the second day here, the buzz, the energy is still high. The people are running around, grabbing stuff, having good conversations. The keynotes are going, the panels are going, the fireside chats are going. And speaking of fireside chats, Bridget Kenyon has a fireside chat later on supply chain. And Bridget, I'm grateful for you to be here on the show with me today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm great to be here.
Yeah, and I mean, supply chain, how much more exciting can that be, right?
Well, Sean, these days, it's in the news, it's everywhere. It is the topic of the month, and possibly, if we're really unlucky, the topic of the year for information security. I tend to say information security because I'm old school, so forgive me.
Yeah, and well, actually, one of our hosts is here, and he had a conversation yesterday talking to somebody about IT security, information security, cybersecurity.
Oh, don't get me started.
I know. What's the difference? So maybe that's another conversation we can have.
I have like hours and hours of thoughts on that subject.
Yes.
Largely because I've watched the word cyber appear, and I saw where it came from, and it's just like, okay, fine, it's trendy and everybody's using it. I am getting on the bandwagon with everybody else, and I am paddling with everybody else these days. I was sort of hanging on behind going, no, I'm not getting on, but no.
Yes, mine is the term hacker. Is there good hackers, bad hackers? Anyway.
Cracker. Why aren't you using the term cracker anymore?
So we're not here to talk about that, but what I want to do is talk quickly about who Bridget is. What do you do? What are you up to? And then we'll get into the whole fun of supply chain. So who's Bridget?
Yeah, so I started off in physics, would you believe, which was a great idea, except it turned into statistics, which is really not my thing. So I ended up in an engineering firm, and I didn't really know where I was going. And I saw an advert for network vulnerabilities working at DERA in Malvern. So, very information security, except that term didn't even exist. So I sort of started the job as an apprentice, effectively, and I loved it. I absolutely loved every part of it. It was thinking like the bad guy. It was being really creative, trying new stuff. Nobody had been there before. It was like, exploring the Antarctic, only you didn't actually have to get cold and wet and, possibly die of exposure and starvation. So, it was all the good stuff without all the bad stuff.
Nice.
And really that's what's carried me through my career. I've tried lots of different things. I actually did some hands-on information for IT support. So I was a network engineer, systems administrator for Linux and also Windows briefly, and an IT manager. And I felt like I needed that to make me feel like I could have a say in the conversation. When somebody started talking about a vulnerability or, should you patch or should you do this upgrade, if I hadn't been in the position of the operational staff and had to deal with that question, I felt that I didn't have the right to engage with them from the security's perspective because I hadn't seen where they were coming from. So I went and I got the jobs and I tried, did the roles, and now I'm sort of back where I'm comfy.
And now you're a cyber IT security officer.
Chief Information Security Officer.
I'm messing with you.
Very close enough. But
I was messing with the words, of course. But now let's. So, why supply chain? You're part of a fireside chat today. I'm interested in your thoughts of how you think that's going to go, and why are you part of that session today?
I think it's because I get interests. One of my sort of background interests is behavioural security and behavioural economics and how people behave in a way that is more efficient and therefore more intuitive. And if you don't align security with that, then people will just slide around security. But another area is supply chain, and behavioural economics feeds into that because of the way people make choices, how you choose a supplier, how you then engage with that supplier thereafter. But I think the main thing about supply chain is just how hard it is. And I like that sort of thing. It's complex, it's difficult, it's a mixture of technology and people and processes. And there's a whole load of sort of social stuff and business stuff inside it. And I like the fact that it all fits together and it's all really quite messy, and see if we can find a nice sort of silver line to help us follow through this problem.
Very international as well. And the first thing I think of, even though I'm software engineer by early trade, and so I do have a software mind. But when I think supply chain, my first thought is like the automobile supply chain, where it's a bunch of parts coming together and on an assembly line. Your view of that, how we started with supply chain in the physical manufacturing world, and how things are different now, perhaps in the software world.
It's a lot of it is now services, and it's like Russian dolls. Each service is inside another service. So you buy a service from a supplier, and they're buying a service from a supplier, and they're buying service from a supplier, and it can actually run around in a big circle. So you are actually a supplier to one of your suppliers.
Right.
And then if you look at it in more detail, you discover that obviously you don't just have one supplier, and neither do your suppliers. So then you start thinking maybe it's more like a network. It's not a supply chain, it's a supply network. And I have progressed from this. I have matured my understanding of the supply chain from being a supply chain to us being a supply network, and now I call it a supply tangle, because that's frankly the only way you can imagine it right now. It's a mess, and it's definitely not just two dimensions.
Yeah, I love that visual, because I mean, well, we've seen, I'm sure you've seen it, third-party risk management was a thing, right? Well, what about second party? What about nth party, which then became a thing? But still, that assumes a chain or a link, a line.
I like to think of string,
Yeah.
because you can have knots in string, and it could get tangled and get really untidy, and you can join it to other pieces of string. And okay, imagine you're an ant, and you're on a ball of wool.
I often do that.
Yeah, I mean it's something we do every day. It's part of one's mindfulness practice.
That's right.
But anyway, so imagine you're an ant, and you're on a ball of wool, and now imagine somebody's tangled that ball of wool up. So the cat's been at it, for example. And now imagine, if you will, that you're either very short-sighted or it is foggy. You can only really see one sort of hop in any direction. So that's what we've got in supply chains. There's this really complicated tangle, but you can't see into it. You can see your direct suppliers because you have a contractual relationship with them. They won't let you inside their environment necessarily to the level maybe you'd like, but you can see them. You can control them via contracts, via agreements. Potentially you have agreements that allow you to, for example, walk in at no minute's notice and actually do a security test. I'm not saying that's a great idea, but I'm saying that some contracts do contain those sorts of provisions.
Certainly in the healthcare space.
Yeah, it's a good way of giving yourself that level of visibility, but again, that's only one hop. You go beyond that. You go beyond the little tiny thing that your little ant can see, and there's a sort of unknown mass of wriggly wool full of potentially all sorts of nasty things.
Yeah. So what, it's $1 million question, of course. What do you see as kind of the way forward? I mean, what we're talking about here is visibility, right?
Yeah.
At least awareness that you need to look, and then the ability to look, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, ability to act after that.
Yeah. Well,
so how do we need to focus still on the first step, on awareness? Are we stuck there still? Or?
Well, there's awareness. There's lots of different variations of the word awareness here.
That there's a problem there that needs to be resolved.
Yeah, I mean, awareness comes first. Yeah. If you've come across the methodology for organisational and individual change, it's called ADKAR. Awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. You have to do it in that order. If you don't have an awareness that there isn't a problem, then you're not going to be able to do anything about it. But you need desire as well. People want to change. Right. Then they have to know how to change. Then they have to have the ability, because you might know that you have to install antivirus, thinking on a personal level, but you might be sitting in front of your computer going, there's 50 different search results. Some of these are probably actually virus. It's not antivirus. Where do I go? That's your knowledge. And then you have, so that's the ability, and then you have reinforcement, where you keep doing stuff and then you get better at it. So I think awareness is important. But if we flip it and start talking about back to our ball of wool with the ant is never going to be able to see beyond the next sort of stage in that ball of wool, the next knot, if you like. However, why don't we think about what can see the whole ball of wool? One thing that can see the whole ball of wool is independent organisations. So, for example, auditing organisations and governments. So what you need is potentially an impartial observer that can see or be permitted to see relevant parts of that ball of wool. So you, the ant, can't see it, but the the knitter, shall we say,
Right.
is looking down on the ball of wool and going, right, okay, I can see there's some problems over there. We're going to deal with it. Little ant, you're fine. And by the way, I don't want to knit you into my sweater, please.
That's right. And I love that view as well, because now I'm picturing the knitter as well, right? Different balls of
We could argue
material
that each government has its own ball of wool.
Right.
But then you have a horrible possibility that you've actually thrown it all together in one big bucket labelled, we have a completely connected, interconnected system of third parties.
Yeah, and where I struggle, I mean, I love that idea because the visibility of the ball, perhaps it's from that perspective, then it's hard to see inside.
Yes,
right?
there are some things you don't know you don't know.
Right, like the ant has a very good view of that part.
Just that little piece.
And then the thing I always end up coming to, like the healthcare space, has good awareness and good models and good contracts and some tools and things. But they also have regulation that I feel puts a lot of pressure on small companies that are trying to innovate and do good things. And in healthcare, it's all about providing patient care, right?
Yeah, but you really want to know that the patient care you're providing is what you intended to provide.
Right.
So reliability and trustworthiness are an absolute foundational element of medical care. And if you take that away and say, all we want is agility, you'll have some great breakthroughs and some really dead people. And that's not a trade-off that anyone's willing to make right now.
So I wanted to touch maybe a little bit on because what you just said reminded me of the idea of data as part of the supply chain, right? So it's not just...
Are you talking data or information?
Data and information.
Data is information without context.
That's right.
As they say. So it goes data, information, knowledge, wisdom.
Right.
If you go up the pyramid.
Yep. I love that. And then everything is API driven these days as well, right? Kind of the service.
Kind of nice. It means you've got a way in that's well understood. It means that you are deliberately treating the application as a black box, and it's got a little sort of hook, and you know what you want to hook to it.
Right. As long as we can understand that the hook's only doing what it.
And you can't see inside. You don't really know what it's doing.
Yeah. So any thoughts on how we? Because that to me is like the ultimate minuscule ant view of things.
Yeah, the ants know about the hooks.
That's right. So does it, and the other point is kind of scaling all this stuff. So yes, an entity overseeing it, but that information inside has to come from somewhere, which means it's distributed by, is it each individual organization, or are there entities within different sectors?
Well, you've got a bigger problem, which is that the definition of what is correct and sufficient is to a certain extent geographic and based on law. And that's something that, like the internet, it has a geographical element that people tend to forget until you ask the question, do I own my personal data, for example? And certain countries you don't, other countries you do. So the laws, the requirements, and the definition of what is adequate security varies completely. So it's not a problem. I tend to, when it comes to that particular problem, I am afraid I'm one of those people who just stands back and admires it. I haven't worked out how to solve it.
Right. So let's speak to, as we wrap here, your fellow CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. Let's give them something. I like to look operational.
Yeah.
What can we leave them with for their own internal third party, nth party, whatever, supply chain risk management program?
I think the most important thing, aside from actually knowing who your immediate third parties are, and that is quite a challenging problem, focus on what you can control and what you should be controlling. There is a tendency to try and remote manage your third party suppliers, to try and write their policies for them, or run their penetration tests for them. Step back, let them have the agency, but require them to prove to you that they are doing what they say they are doing. And make sure that you know where their responsibilities end and yours start. Which things are they doing for you that you require them to do to your standards? And which things are they thinking you're going to be doing? Because if there's a gap, that's actually possibly worse, because then nobody is, for example, and I pick an example that I've actually lived through, no one is in fact patching the servers.
Yeah, well, a lot of the same challenges you face in your own role within your own organization, they're facing as well. So do you find or feel that a meaningful conversation goes a long way? in terms, because I feel we tend to rely on, well, contracts which are very impersonal, right? And tools which we blindly trust to some degree versus a conversation. And I'm not saying get rid of the other two, but starting with a conversation where you have a good rapport and understanding of what their mindset is and how they think and how, perhaps hopefully how they act as well. I think that's important.
I think you're right. It is those three things: the tools, the formal contracts, and then the relationships that you have with for example, your counterparts in the supplier companies or your counterparts in your customer companies, because most organisations are in some way going to be a supplier to a customer. Otherwise, how are they deriving value? So it has to be all three. But I would say they each have their role and their value. If you have a contract, you have something foundational that underpins exactly where the responsibilities lie and where the buck stops and who does what, and that is really important. If you have tools, then you have a method for determining in a very impartial sense whether certain things are as they are expected to be. But tools will only check what they're capable of checking, and that might actually not be what you value. The relationship is the glue that holds it all together, that enables you to, stretch something or interpret something or understand something or give somebody a bit of extra room to do something, because yes, they are trying, they haven't quite met what the contract needs, but in fact you're comfortable with the risk right now and they have a route to get to where you want them to be.
Well, thanks, Bridget, for taking my brain and turning it into a big ball of yarn this morning.
At least I could do.
My brain's the size of an ant's, by the way, so you've made me think.
Proportionately, probably that's a good thing. Ants probably have quite large brains proportionate to their body.
Very good. I'll take that. I'll take that. And fabulous meeting, fabulous chatting with you, and
thank you for your time.
Look forward to your panel, your fireside chat there, and you're very welcome anytime. Want to talk about this or anything else, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you.